Ken Tate. I'm the Director of Engagement and External Relations for the Department of Computer Science. On behalf of the college and the department and all of our faculty, it's my honor to welcome you here tonight. This is the LabCorp Speaker Series. 13 years now. It started out as a Fidelity Investment Series, but during COVID happened, and so we had an opportunity, and we're just very thankful. Anybody here from LabCorp tonight? Nope, sometimes LabCorp folks are here. We're so thankful to them because they made a 3-year commitment that allows us to take this wonderful series and continue to move it forward. A couple of announcements. Now would be a great time to silence your phone. Also, I mentioned that we're videotaping this. So if you know someone who couldn't be here tonight, you could ping them now and say, if you check out the website and the link, they can watch this live. And we'll also have it up on the dedicated YouTube channel sometime within the next week. So we'll make that available. This series was put in place primarily to talk about leadership in technology, because leadership is not just leadership, right? It is a little different in the world of technology, and we cover a lot of different topics. Tonight, we're doing a deeper dive into the entrepreneurial world, and we're very, very happy to have with us tonight one of our very own, Mr. Drew Banks. So Drew, I'm going to talk off script just a little bit here. Drew and I met 12 years or so ago on a trip out to California, and I was so impressed. He's just one of those individuals that just really clearly makes a mark on you, and you don't forget them. Fast forward, about 5 years ago, we launched our Hall of Fame. So we've got 10,000 alums now in computer science. We set this Hall of Fame up to coincide with our 50th year celebration with the idea here is plenty of time. We've got lots of successful people. Let's find the top 1%, the super achievers, right? And lots of names over my 20-year career popped up. Drew's was one of them. I am so happy to tell you that Drew is being inducted into the Computer Science Hall of Fame tomorrow. So congratulations, Drew. Let me tell you a little bit about Drew. I'm not going to steal all of his thunder because I've seen his charts, and he's going to tell you much more than I ever could. But Drew is a seasoned tech entrepreneur. We kind of positioned him as a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, which he is. He will tell you that he's failed and he's learned. And most entrepreneurs fail. They'll fail fast and then move on. But he's going to tell you about his journey. But he had a really interesting journey. He was here, spent some time at SAS. Any of you guys work at SAS? Wow. Well, you did, right? So I'm surprised. Usually we have 2 or 3 people that have interned or are interning at SAS. But he did intern there. Graduated and then spent a couple of years in New York City doing the performing arts thing and learning from that. And then ended up making some other career moves. And again, I just don't want to tell you about it because I know what's in his presentation, and it's going to be really exciting. But he's not only just an entrepreneur, he's an author. He's written business books. He's 4 books, actually, and he's a novelist. And he's currently working on his 5th and a screenplay. Wow. So I guess all that we got to look forward to. Ladies and gentlemen, Drew Banks.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for that introduction. And thank you guys for coming tonight. I know some of you are getting credit, so I hope I will deliver that credit to you. I want to underscore one thing that Ken said, which is the concept of failing and learning through failure. I believe strongly that it's one of the few things that American tech culture has over a lot of other tech cultures. After spending a decade with 2 companies in Europe, I really, really feel this strongly. I spoke at a couple of European conventions about this, and there's such a desperate fear of failure in Europe, in European companies, that it really bootstraps them from actually trying something different. And I'm not going to say, cultural things, I don't want to blanket all of Europe with that, but I really felt when I was there, this is one thing that American entrepreneurialism really has, at least over European entrepreneurialism. I can't speak for other parts of the world, but certainly there. Now back to entrepreneurialism. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. I actually never wanted to be a computer science major. My trip to entrepreneurialism is a circuitous one, which I will go through now, and I will highlight the lessons of each point of my career journey. Hopefully, some of them will be useful lessons for you. If not, hopefully you enjoyed tonight's presentation. Now, I did not start my career focused globally. It ended globally. I started focusing on the U.S. In fact, I started my life in the U.S. Even more than in the U.S., I started it in the South. I'm sure a lot of you are from the South as well. Hand raising somewhere in the South. Oh, not as many as I thought. Wow, okay. Well, well, my mother was born in Wrightsville Beach. My grandfather was a commercial fisherman who had his boat docked at Station 1. So I bet a lot of you have been to Wrightsville Beach, know Station 1. But that's how her family was raised. My father was raised in Gardner. They met in Raleigh. My mother at that time lived in an apartment above the Players Retreat, which I think still looks almost the same. I can't believe she lived there, but I think it looked that way back when they met. I was born in High Point, and then we moved to Memphis for my father's job, and that's where I was raised. When I decided to go to college, I chose NC State for two reasons. One, because ever since I was a little boy, ever since I could remember, I wanted to be an architect. And there's a great school of design in NC State. So I narrowed my focus there, and I also wanted to get to know my extended family. Because we grew up in Memphis and all my family was in North Carolina, we only met them once a year. So I applied to NC State and got accepted, but I did not get accepted into the design school. And I got waitlisted for a year, and during that year I was supposed to, I didn't even have a portfolio to speak of. So they said, spend a year building your portfolio and take some other classes. One of the classes I took was logic. Do they still teach logic here? I thought it was the easiest thing I had ever taken. I mean, it was just, logical. It was just the way my brain works. But all my other classmates were having a hard time with it. It was really, according to them, the hardest class they'd ever taken. We were only freshmen, so they had a lot coming at them in the future. But for me, it was simple. And my professor came to me after that semester and said, have you ever thought about computer science? The way that your brain works would map directly onto computer science. And it was a new field at the time. I really hadn't thought about it. There was not really much opportunity that I knew of. But I took CSC 101. Does that still exist? No. I took the first course in computer science, and again, it was simple. So at that point, I turned immediately to computer science and dropped my lifelong dream of becoming an architect. So this first lesson is know when to pivot. So at this point, I had pivoted completely from my lifelong dream to computer science, even though I will come back to architecture in a minute. Later in the presentation, I did get to fulfill that dream at some little aspect, but I really dove into computer science. And I also, it was so easy for me, I decided to double major in electrical engineering, which is not logic-based. So electrical engineering, I was like, wow, okay, this is memory-based. I was a terrible student. That was hard. I made it through, but with the dual degrees, it was really an exciting, I felt like I had an exciting future. My first year at NC State, I was on a small scholarship and I had to work in the administration of the school to pay off that scholarship, and I worked in the statistics department. And at the end of that first year, some of my employers said, are you going to go home over the summer, or do you want to stay around Raleigh and do an internship? Back then, internships weren't a thing. It was like, wow, I could get a job here and stay, and what's the company? The woman, my boss, said, there's a professor at NC State that has started this tiny little company out in Cary, and he needs someone to test his code. So I drove out to what was then truly a tiny company. It was SAS, and I was just blown away, and I absolutely decided to work there over the summer and test Dr. Goodnight. Dr. Goodnight is like 6'6", intimidating as heck, and I was testing his code and showing him all the errors in his code. It was a great experience. And my lesson there was be opportunistic. This opportunity just arose. I had plans to go back to Memphis for my summer. I had plans with friends back there, but when this opportunity presented itself, I couldn't say no. For these first two lessons, I also want to present the counterpoints of them. The counterpoint of pivoting. What would be the counterpoint of pivoting? Could someone, instead of pivoting to something new, what?
I was going to say you have an opportunity cost to pivoting.
No, it's not. There is an opportunity cost to pivoting, and you're close. But what was the actual thing not pivoting? What would that be?
Staying the course.
Yeah, staying the course, persistence. And I'm an incredibly persistent guy. So I'm not saying pivot at every point there's a pivoting opportunity. I'm saying pivot when you feel it deep in your soul that, wow, this is the time to pivot. That's what I felt when I took that computer science course. That's why I pivoted. Otherwise, I would have tried to stay the course and go and design. Opportunistic, what's the counterpoint to opportunism? I would say it's focus. Like, focus on what you said you were going to do. Don't look at the opportunities in your way. Focus, 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 focus. Similarly, I'm a hugely focused person, but I don't believe in ignoring the opportunities. As an entrepreneur, I believe in the scattershot approach. I believe that you scatter a lot of seeds, you see which ones grow, and then you prune the ones that don't serve you well. I'm a big believer, especially for small companies. Now, there's a challenge with that that's really important. To do that well means you have to prune well. You can't just scatter 100 seeds and then let them all grow and then try to let them all, even the ones that aren't doing well. You have to figure out which ones are working and prune the rest. That's why a lot of times you'll hear people talk about opportunism as a flawed path because people don't know how to prune. But if you know how to prune, I would say scatter as many seeds as possible and see which ones work. And that's definitely what I learned here. If I had not taken the job at SAS, my whole career would be different. My third year in school, my aunt and uncle took me to see a play called A Chorus Line. I'd never seen a play. I grew up in lower middle class. We didn't do plays. And I'd definitely never seen a musical except on TV. I was absolutely enthralled. I walked away. I was already in my double major. And the next day I called a local dance company and signed up. And because I'm a relatively large guy and I could lift women, I got sort of parts very quickly. What I wasn't expecting was to take that somewhere. The girl that I was dating at the time said, you have to take this to New York. You have to go to Broadway. I said, I'm getting a computer science, electrical engineering degrees, but she convinced me. And it was an absolutely amazing experience. 2 years of my life, auditioning, being on stage, one time on Broadway. It was amazing. So I do believe in following your passion, but I'm highly pragmatic. Before I went to New York, I scoured SAS's customer database, found out all their customers in New York. I joined one called, at the time it was called Special Services for Children, which monitored the abused children in the 5-borough area, and I managed their data systems while I was auditioning and doing all that other. I knew that I didn't have the background to go in New York and make it unless I was incredibly lucky, and I didn't get that lucky, so I had this incredible backup plan. About 2 years into New York, I was really overwhelmed with New York. Living in New York without much money, difficult. Straddling both of this, my work life and dance, challenging. And a lot of other things were happening in my life. And I was in the break room, and I told a colleague, I said, God, I want to get out of New York. And she said, have you ever thought of business school? And I thought, no, I've never thought of business school. Don't you need to want to do business to go into business school? And she said, no. It's just a way to change up your life. It's a stepping stone to the next. I'm pretty good at standardized tests. So, I took the GMAT, did well, and ended up at MIT Sloan School. At Sloan, so up until now, my two interests had been incredibly dichotic. I had my left brain really focused on computer science and engineering, and my right brain really focused on dance. And I didn't really see an intersection of those two. What I found at MIT was that intersection is in their DNA. I arrived at MIT just after the Media Lab was introduced. Everyone thought of music and arts as integral to technology, and it was just an amazing 2 years. So my lesson from here is just find your tribe. There's some tribe that you're going to feel way more comfortable with. And it's not to say I didn't feel comfortable at NC State, I did. But when I told my classmates at NC State that I was going from an engineering lab to a dance class, they were like, why? I mean, it would just, I could not get the grokking of what I was doing, where I got that at MIT, and it was amazing. I knew out of MIT I wanted to go to Silicon Valley. There's a lot of lore about Silicon Valley, and so I targeted Silicon Valley and landed at a company called Silicon Graphics, or SGI. Who in here knows of that company? Oh, wow, that's surprising. Wow, okay, great. A lot of people don't know it today, but at the time, SGI was the darling of Silicon Valley. I mean, it was, all other companies were tanking. Apple was about to go out of business. It was a hair's away from going out of business, and SGI was on the rise. Basically, SGI introduced computer graphics to the world, and through many industries, but the one that you would probably know is through the entertainment industry. A lot of the early CGI was done on SGI systems. And this intersection of design and technology was so strong there that it just drew me in. But even then, it wasn't until, I don't know, it wasn't until like 15 years ago that engineering really respected, I would say even Airbnb, maybe Apple helped out, that engineering began to respect design and have it an integral part of design, which I love that movement. I wish I was coming of age now because it's all over the place, that intersection between the two. I learned, God, I was at SGI for a decade, and I learned so many things. I grew up at SGI, and as I mentioned, they were the darling of Silicon Valley. But what I really learned are these next two lessons. I included two here. One is compete outward. In any group, in any company, and in any organization, there is this desire to compete inward. You're competing with your colleague on their salary. You're competing with the next department on what they're achieving. You're lambasting HR and finance, saying they're not important departments. Why? All the competition energy goes inward, and it doesn't go outward. It's like, who are your external competitors? Why are we in existence to compete against them? And if I had my career to do over again, and especially my company, which I'll show you in a minute, I would institute weekly meetings that forced everyone to think about external competitor. I mean, I think it's so important. And a lot of people say, well, we don't really have competitors. We're the only ones doing what we're doing. Nah, it's not true. And if it's true right now, it's not going to be true tomorrow. So if you don't have competitors today, you're going to have them tomorrow. So you need to understand what they are going to do to compete with you, instead of spending all of that energy inside. A similar lesson here is avoid complacency. SGI said the world was going to be dominated with computer graphics. It was going to become mainstream, but they did not plan for it. They predicted it, but they didn't plan for it. Instead, they became complacent in their dominance. At the end of our tenure, we bought a company bigger than us, Cray Computers. And while all of the world was changing around us, we were trying to digest this behemoth company that was so different than us that it absolutely killed us. And Apple and Sun Microsystems took over the computer. Well, a lot, NVIDIA took over that, and we sank. And it happened fast. Between 1 year that we were on the cover of Business Week, Silicon Graphics, the G Whiz company, almost exactly a year later, the sad saga of Silicon Graphics. I mean, it happened that quickly. So really, really, no matter how well you're doing, if you're in hypergrowth and you don't think you have any competitors, you do have a competitor, and don't get complacent in that growth. At my final 2 years or actually maybe final 3 years of SGI, I was taking on more and more responsibility, and someone handed me internal communications. And we had, I think, 12,000 employees at that time. So wrangling communications to those 12,000 employees was challenging, and they were across the globe. And it was at the same time, so I guess it was 1994, so it was at the same time the Mosaic came out, the internet was then taking over, and the speed and access of communications had changed dramatically. So if you wanted your employees to listen to you, you had to communicate quickly, and you had to communicate honestly, and you had to provide easy access. So what we did was take over the intranet. At the time, the intranet was very nascent in most companies and was a list of links. We actually turned it into a newspaper, called it Silicon Junction, had daily news, had daily images, similar to Google has on their website, and communicated to the world that way. And I ended up in those last 2 years of my career traveling the world, showing other companies how to do that, because it was such a new way of communicating to employees. At one stop, I think it was in Berlin, a publisher approached me and said, would you write a book about that? That is such an interesting way to run an internal communications program. I said, sure, and got two of my employees together, and we wrote this book called Beyond Spin. And Beyond Spin is where I learned about another trait that I think is innate to me, that I think is really important in business, and that's to distill complexity. I imagine, like most of you, are drawn to very complex problems. I mean, it just makes my engineering brain go off. And then I like to simplify them. And to be able to sell them, you really, especially if you're selling to a consumer world, you need to be able to really distill that complexity and why they need that and how simple it is, or at least a veneer of simplicity. After I wrote Beyond Spin, I was going to take a few months off, so I consulted, and with mostly around setting up intranets and internal communications. I had this 6 months gig at Qualcomm to write the story of Qualcomm, and 52 stories to be told to the employees 1 week at a time. And then I finally landed at a community site called Third Age Media. This was toward the end of the dot-com boom. Third Age Media was an affinity site targeting older people with the information and services they needed. I was drawn to the complexity of this because whereas all the other community sites at the time, gay.com, netnoir.com, they had very defined affinities that self-identified. Third Age was trying to target an affinity that didn't self-identify, because the older people don't want to think they're getting older, but they wanted to provide them with the services and data that they need, which was, I found that a fantastic challenge. One thing I didn't like, and I learned very, very well at Third Age, was the way Third Age was trying to solve it was they were copying everything everybody else did. What's gay.com doing? What's women.com doing? There was not any original thinking in what they and sometimes you can copy what other people are doing and do it better, or do it for your target audience in a way that is, and that works, but it was all bandwagon stuff. And I was like, well, let's do something new completely for our demographic. At the very end of my tenure there, we were looking at a partnership with Ancestry.com. I'm like, that's interesting. All people like tracing their family trees. That is really interesting. But unfortunately, the dot-com bubble burst before that was able to happen, and community and affinity sites were the first to go. Now I rolled out, I mentioned that I wanted to take 2 months off before. Now I was exhausted. I was like, I'm taking a couple of years off. I'm really just exhausted. But in that time, a friend of mine came to me and said, will you help me write a business plan? And this is where the accidental entrepreneurial, I did not want to run my own company. It seemed like too much responsibility. But I said yes, and it was a super complex problem. It was, we wanted to simplify home networking. We saw the proliferation of network devices in the home, and that people didn't even know how to set up a router. So we wanted to simplify that process with an intermediary in front of the router, which was consumer hardware, which had consumer software, which worked with enterprise software that connected with a partner like Geek Squad, who was a partnership we were developing with Best Buy and Geek Squad, and that would solve that whole problem. Still believe it's the right solution. Still believe that most people don't know how to manage their home networks, but it was a boil the ocean solution. It was absolutely too much to tackle. At one time, we spent our first 6 years just trying to get money. We closed a $10 million round 8 days before the Lehman debacle and the second crash. So we thought we were on the top of the world, but we were not. The whole company was, the next year we spent $10 million without blinking, because when you have hardware in the equation, hardware, to get a prototype in hardware is like, I don't know, 8 million out, off the top. Maybe with 3D printing, it's cheaper now, but back then it wasn't. And we hadn't made a single dollar, because we were trying to get the right solution out at the right time and get the entire solution out. So of all the lessons here, for those of you wanting to start your own companies, the one that I would say is the strongest is nothing validates like revenue. Nothing. Well, profit even more. Profit's amazing, but revenue is great. We had the right solution. We had Best Buy this close to saying yes. We knew we had a prototype, but we didn't have revenue. So for our third round, then we raised another 10 million, 20 million. But on our third round, everyone was like, well, where's the revenue? We can't invest anymore. And the company collapsed. And it was awful. I mean, it was the most learning I've ever had in my life was from Pi. The worst experience in my life was Pi. And it's funny to tell people my career story. I've said every company I've ever worked for has been great, except my own, which was miserable. And at one point, our board kicked out the CEO. I had to take over as CEO. I'd never even wanted to run a company. Now I'm CEO of a dying company. It was just miserable. But I learned a heck of a lot through that. Stuff that I could never have learned in business school. So I don't regret it, but I would never do it again. If you're ever going through something that terrible, learn. That's just sit there and learn, because that is the best learning experience ever. Now that 2 years I wanted off, I wanted desperately. I only had one more meeting on my calendar, and I was just going to disconnect from tech altogether. It was a networking meeting, and I walked into it and met this Hungarian entrepreneur who said, I've just started this company that's a presentation company, and then he went for a 30-minute spiel about what he did. And I said, you mean it's like PowerPoint means Zoom? And so I distilled, and he's like, oh, yeah, that was incredible. Can you come and be our head of marketing? Kelly's laughing because I then hired Kelly, which I'll talk about in a minute, who's an alum from NC State. I said, it's funny you're asking me to be the only role that I've never done. In my own company, I've been CEO, COO, CPO. Like I said, I'd never done service at the time either. But you're asking me to do that, but sure, okay. No, I know, I did not say sure. Wait a second. I said, absolutely not. He said, will you go and just look at the product? And I went home and I looked at the product, and I'm a sucker for visual communications. That is what I love. And Prezi was that in spades. It was visual communications, and they had done something that SGI was never able to do. They got a 3D editor into the mainstream. It's not really 3D, it's 2.5D, but close enough. They got it into the mainstream. I'm like, wow, I worked at a company for 10 years that tried to do this, and we could never get 3D into the mainstream. So I was hooked, and I said, yeah, sure, I'll try it for a year. I ended up being there 5 years, and it was a great experience. And for the first 4 of those, we were in hypergrowth, and that's where I learned I love hypergrowth. Who doesn't? Getting in a company that's up and to the right is a great thing. And again, this is another company where I have so many lessons, but I think my biggest lessons are about hiring here. When I joined Prezi, we were like 12 employees, and when I left, we were over 200, and a lot of those hires came from me personally. A lot of the time, we didn't have an HR department. And when you're hiring, you have this decision to hire an experienced person or a person with potential. At least that's how I see. And a lot of entrepreneurs skew toward experience because they don't have the experience. They're like, okay, let's get the been there, done that person into this company. Because Prezi was in such new fields and everything was changing so fast, we were early to the cloud. I mean, we were early in cloud computing, we were early SAS, and we were early freemium. And we were doing freemium different than everybody else was doing freemium. So it's like, I don't know if been there, done that is the way to go. So I want to hire really passionate potential. Kelly over here is an example of that. When I was hiring a head of PR for the company, and I wanted someone with active PR experience, with at least a decade of PR experience. And Kelly had just graduated NC State, and she was head of the student body, and she had her own PR firm out here, but it was, forgive me, small potatoes compared to, and it wasn't California PR, right? I wanted tech PR. But she blew my socks off when she interviewed, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm going to give you this chance. It may only be 6 months, and you're going to have to prove yourself at every step of the way. And can you do that? And she said, she signed me up. She did. She and another NC State grad who was a rhetorics major. I mean, Ken introduced him to me. He's like, I have this rhetorics major. He's really smart. Can you do something with him? And I'm like, I can make him an intern in a service. And I did that, and he then grew to take over half of marketing, and he's now a serial CMO in Silicon Valley, doing incredibly well. I believe so much in potential not versus experience. I believe in both, but in a small company with everything's changing and a culture that originates in Europe, because this was a Hungarian company where most employees were in Europe. I was the only one in the US. You're trying to build culture at the same time. I guarantee you that passionate potential will give you a better culture than long-term experience. Almost every time, hands down. So at this point, Prezi had grown to about 200 employees. I was traveling to Budapest all the time. And it was hard on my personal life. It was hard on my relationship. I had just recently gotten married, and my husband's an OBGYN. And, to have two intense jobs in the home, thank God we didn't have kids. I don't know how two working parent kids do it. If you're out there, bow down. It was hard. And my partner got or my husband at the time got a Fulbright research scholarship to go to Budapest, of all places. I'm going to Budapest all the time. So I talked to the CEO and said, how about we move my position to Budapest? He's like, And by the way, when I joined Prezi, I wasn't just running marketing, I was running marketing, sales, and support. So it was truly like a chief customer officer. And he said, we really want that position here. He said, but you can move there in another position, and if you help me hire your replacement. So we hired two different people, a head of marketing, a head of sales, and I moved over to Budapest because I didn't, at this time in my relationship, did not want to forego that, just after my marriage, that time with my husband. And that was a big lesson for me. Like stepping down in my career, it wasn't that much of a step down, but it was a step down. And I knew I needed to compromise to do that. I knew I couldn't do it all. I knew that I wanted a very balanced life. And so I made that compromise, and it was a fantastic year. And I learned, while international was a piece of my role in Mountain View, when I was able to completely focus on international, I was able to give it the attention it needed to grow that part of the business, which was just spectacular. Finally, the travel, we moved back to San Francisco after a year after the Fulbright Research Scholarship was done, and I retired the first time. I was done. I never got my 2-year sabbatical, but I got a chance to retire. And I got a chance to relive that dream that I talked about earlier of architecture. We bought land in Baja, And one of my best friends is a Mexican architect, and I was able to build a house from ground up with him at every level. And I'm like, wow, I couldn't have asked for more. And I'm glad I was an architect for my career, because that's a hell of a lot of work. But I loved every minute of doing it for my own house. And then after it was built, someone called me. One of my employees from Prezi had introduced another Hungarian entrepreneur and said, can we talk to you? We're going to be in San Francisco. And I said, I'm not going to go back to work. I am not going to go back to work. So I went to meet these guys at a neighboring cafe. And I sat down. They hadn't even asked me if they wanted to hire me. I sat down. I'm like, I'm happy to give you advice. I don't know if you're trying to hire me, but you can hire me because I'm not going back to work. I'm very happily retired. What's your business? And they showed me the business. It's Drops. It's a language learning app. Anybody use Drops in here? Heard of it? So you probably know it's very visual in nature. So once again, I'm looking at this it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful app. And it's like, and not only visual communication, it's visual learning. And so I look at this and I go, oh my God, that is so gorgeous. And they're so inexperienced. They have no idea how to get to the US market. They have no idea how to take it global, but they're still growing at hypergrowth. And they're not VC backed. After my own company, I swore off VCs. I will never work in a VC backed company again. And so they were bootstrapped. They were profitable. I'm like, oh my God. I said, if I were going back to work, this would be the ideal company to go back to work for. And I walked away from the meeting, and then I called them right when I got home. I said, I still don't know if you're trying to hire me, but if you are, I could possibly do it for a year under these very specific circumstances. And they said, we weren't trying to hire you, but now that you're available, maybe. And so they met my demand. I went to work for Drops, and the company was in hypergrowth for the entire time I was there. It's a very unique app. It's really focused on vocabulary learning, and vocabulary learning as a foundation to learning a second language. And it was a great experience. It was a fully remote company. Every employee, there were only 3 employees from the same country, and that was Hungary. All the rest were from different countries all over the world. So it was the first time I really got to experience true international company. And what I learned here, and this is what everything from my career led me to, is leading with confidence. This was the first company I walked into where I'd sort of done the job before. I'd always jumped around. I was in IT, I was running a company. I'd always jumped around, but when I walked into Drops, I knew exactly what to do. And it was the first time I had confidence of telling the founders of the company, no, this is the market you need to go in. No, we need to create this product to get there. And they were very, very open to listening. It's one of the things I love about European startups is I really like working with kindness and intelligence, or let's just say modesty and intelligence. It's rare to find that in Silicon Valley. You'll find intelligence, but egocentric, and you'll find modest, but not intelligent. But in Europe, you can find these incredibly bright people that are just like, oh, help us out. And I was like, wow, it was an absolutely great experience. I was able to get global recognition very, very, very quickly. Faster than I thought. And I'll tell that story. How much time do we have, Ken?
20 minutes.
Okay, so I'll tell the story because I'm about done after that. It's most most media won't write about non-VC backed company. They just won't. They're lazy, and that first funding round is why they write about you. And so you're in this catch-22. If you want to be a bootstrap company and succeed, you've got to get media, but media won't cover you unless you take VC money, and then it just becomes hard. So I first tried to build just a story around the hyper growth and profitability. A bootstrapped hyper growth profitable company, come on, you got to write about that. Didn't get a bite. And we were launching a new language, Hawaiian, and we were only launching it. It didn't really make sense if we were looking at what were going to be the most profitable languages. We were launching because the CEO loved the language and loved the culture of Hawaii. And I asked him, I said, does Duolingo, Babbel, or Rosetta Stone have Hawaiian? They're like, no. We happen to know that Duolingo was working on it. I'm like, if we can find the release date and we can launch before them, I hired a PR firm who came up with this incredible strategy for us. We can launch before them and talk about the revitalization of Hawaiian, because Hawaiian almost went extinct in the 60s. And there's a strong community in Hawaii that's trying to revitalize. And we tell the story of how tech can help that effort, not take over that effort, but help that effort of revitalizing dying languages. And that story hit I got TechCrunch, Fast Company, Forbes, VentureBeat, all in that one article. And then I was like, wow, that was the platform that Drops needed to build upon for global recognition. And right after that, and I think partially because of that, we got the Google App of the Year, which accelerated that. I don't think without any kind of global recognition we could have gotten it, but it just happened to be a 1-2 punch. And that sent Drops on another 3 years of hypergrowth. It was an incredible experience. Toward the end, or 2 years, because I was only there for 2.5. Toward the end of 2 years, I was really ready to get back to my retirement. And I said, okay, we are in hypergrowth. We're about to plateau. I can see the plateau coming. There are 3 things that you can do with a plateau coming. You can stay the course and then just continue to take profits out of the company, run it like a mom and pop shop. And that's what they were planning to do, which I had never heard of in a tech company. Like, you're just gonna run it as a family business and continue to take profits. I'm like, cool, I guess that could work. You can take a venture round, and if you take a venture round, I'm out because I don't want to work with VCs. Or you can sell the company, and if you sell the company, you should do it before hitting that plateau, because then you're selling on a valuation of hype versus on a valuation of plateau. And the Gartner Group did a really good study on this. It's called the hype curve, and the stages a company goes through. And if you sell right before you hit that plateau, you're going to be more highly valued than when you hit that plateau. And the guys, both wanting to do their next things, said, yeah, one of them wanting to do the next thing with Drops, and one of them wanting to do the next things out of Drops. Both said, yeah, let's do it. And so I stayed on I hired not a venture capitalist, a investment banker and a lawyer, and we were able, because we were profitable, because I think we had the highest profit of employee of any company that I know of, because I run such a tight ship, and they were both in agreement with that. I mean, we got offers immediately. We had to shut down the opening up for offers in a week. And most of them were from language companies. I can't say the names, but you probably can guess who. They were the big ones. But there was one that was from a company I had never heard of, which is called Kahoot. Does anyone know Kahoot? Okay, well, Kahoot is gamified learning, and not just language. It gamifies all different types of learning. You can create these little Kahoot games that everyone in your company or in school. And what I liked about Kahoot is what it spanned education to business and to B2B, not just consumer business, but B2B. And it went from education all the way from kindergarten through primary, through grad school. I mean, it was pretty amazing because you can use Kahoot, everyone can relate to Kahoot. So I thought this gave Drops an incredible runway to move on from language learning. And so we did. We were able to sell to Kahoot. That happened in last November. I told them I'd stay on for a little while longer to help with the integration of the company. And as of now, I'm retired again. My lesson here is both personal, and the companies know when to exit. For personal, I've known that I'm ready to exit for a while, and now I think this one's going to stick. For a company, it's really hard to know when to exit, because when you're in hypergrowth, you're believing your own hype, and you're like, oh, we're never going to plateau. It's always going to be good. And I'm like, you're going to plateau. You're going to plateau at some time. And what comes after the plateau, according to Gartner, is, I love their name for this, the trough of disillusion. And you have to get through that trough, and you have to focus, and you may have to even downsize, which I'm not a big fan of being a part of, before you can come out the other side. I really wanted to miss the trough because I got it a little bit at SGI, and it's not a fun place to be. So with that, I am now retired. I think this may be the last presentation of my career. Although walking down here, Ken said, I don't believe that. But I think so. And so this is my current retirement, and I guess my last slide should be go Wolfpack for the tomorrow.
Thank you, Drew. So we're going to have time for Q&A, and the way I'd like to do this, we would typically pass around a microphone, but it's just very cumbersome and it takes time away. So what I'd like for you to do, if anyone in the audience has a question, raise your hand when you get called on. Just say it very loudly, but if you would in turn kind of restate the question and then respond to the question, that will help the folks online. And Tammy's monitoring our online attendees, and so if she has any questions, Tammy, maybe you can raise your hand and we'll get to you. Anyone have a question?
Do I point them out, or do you?
Just up to you, yeah.
Okay, let's do here and then here.
So you said that you wouldn't ever work with VC-backed companies. Are there any reasons for that?
Yes. Let me see. I got to be very careful in how I answer. So have you seen the movie The Social Network? Yeah, I experienced some of that. I mentioned that my own company, there was some challenges. We didn't have revenue, and the VC-controlled board wanted to take the company in a certain direction. I didn't agree with it, and there was nothing I could do. And it was very difficult for me, and I didn't want to relive that trauma. I'm not saying that VC isn't right for any entrepreneur, but they're looking at multiples on their investment, so they're going to drive you to go bigger than you may want to go, but they're going to feed your ego and go, oh, don't just stop there, take it there, take it there. If we would have introduced VC at Drops, they would have been like, oh, you shouldn't sell this. We sold Drops for $50 million. And the founders had 95% of the company, so they did well. But a VC would have said, Drops can be everything. You should push through. You should push through. And they would want to invest. And to get the multiple on what they invest, we would have to go to a much bigger place. That's okay for many entrepreneurs. Again, I'm not a natural entrepreneur. I don't want to just sacrifice my life for a long time for a big payout at the end, if I don't believe in it. So I'm not criticizing VCs. I'm criticizing them for me. Yep.
So kind of as you just said, that you weren't about, trying to get up to that biggest scale as you were doing entrepreneuring and things like that. My question is, what precisely drove you through all of these places, making all these decisions, accepting all these projects? What personally did you find fulfilling about that?
Oh, first of all, I love scale. That doesn't mean, because I love driving to scale. I just don't like the optimization of a company to get to scale. So I can do it. I've done it. I much prefer the innovation. I'm much more sort of like, what's the idea? How are we going to get into a market? How are we going to customize that market? What drove me was most of the companies, again, except my own, were these visual communication companies. And this nexus of design and technology, I just love. I absolutely love it. And up until recently in history, if you loved it, there weren't many places for it to go. There weren't many companies really looking. Most UIs up through the 90s were done by the engineering team without sort of design orientation. I loved the blend. So it was the blend, and it was also the people. So when I met people that I respected and wanted to work with, I would be like, okay, I'm in. And if it's on an idea I love, those two things, and hyper growth. When you jump in a company that is growing so fast, and it's just, there's nothing like it. So I guess it would be those three things. Yes.
So you were mentioning a time in your life where marriage and travel was it was difficult to balance that life, right?
Yep.
And I have an employee that's kind of in a similar position where his travel, he recently got married in India, but he's in the US and he's trying to balance that. What were some points you made with your company or the group you were with to kind of help them understand a better work-life balance for you so you could be at your best potential?
I mean, I was fortunate when that situation happened at Prezi, and I was really good friends with the CEO. And he's gay as well, so he didn't like do this like, well, gay marriage isn't the same as straight marriage. So it was very, it was, yeah, it was very easy to talk to him about this. And fortunately, I was in a position that I could say, you know, let's hire. I was doing marketing, sales, and support. I had never done any of them. I said, let's hire someone who's done marketing. Let's hire someone who's done sales, and let me run international from Budapest, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So I was able to have an argument that worked.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I mean, so is this your company you're talking about?
No, it's a
Yeah.
one near the camera.
I'm not sure. I mean, I do believe in giving accommodations for families. I do believe in giving accommodations for pregnancy and for birth. And even at a startup level, I do believe strongly. But I don't know if I could give a pat answer of what. I mean, I guess I would say remote work now.
That's all we're doing,
Yeah.
trying to justify it through cost. So everything's, you know, with COVID, it's easy
Yeah.
anyway. So.
It's easy for the worker. It can be challenging for the family, depending on the size of the place they live. But I don't think that's for the company to solve unless you then give I mean, my last company gave, because we were fully remote, they gave a stipend for everyone to get like a WeWork space, and so they could get out of the house. And I thought that worked really well. Now they could do that because they had 0 facilities. We didn't have a central office. Everyone was remote. So when we flew anywhere to do strategic meetings, we would meet at a WeWork space.
Yeah.
And so because we saved so much money in facilities, we could spend that money giving employees this sort of benefit, which helped with the work-life balance.
Oh yeah, the Zoom meetings and everything where you can just kind of gather everybody quick and then break apart, it's way easy now.
Yeah, I mean, we're all used to it now, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Yep.
So being a user of Prezi myself, I know the product is really good and there's not something like that on the market currently, but still its adoption in the industry is not up to the mark or what it could be. So what do you think are some of the challenges as to why it's not being more engaged in the industry?
Wait, let me hear the question again. The challenge with, so being a user of Prezi, your mask is making it, like, can you just pull down for a sec? Yeah.
So, I really like the product, the Prezi.
Yep.
So it is just totally different from how presentations are made.
Yep.
So the product is pretty good, but still its adoption in the industry is not up to the mark. So what do you think are some of the challenges which is being faced by the company?
By Prezi in particular, Prezi's challenge was always, even though they got to the mainstream, the 2.5D editor is still really hard for most people. And the bigger challenge, in my mind, we kept trying to solve that challenge, which I think is a difficult one to solve. The bigger challenge in the business space is that our competitors are you know, the 3 competitors are Microsoft, Google, and Apple. And most of the products are free or basically free if you buy one of their computers. So going after the business space was really, really challenging. What I tried to build at Prezi was staying focused on the educational space and creating a cohort through education that would graduate into business, and then they would use Prezi as their primary presentation tool. But that takes, you have to follow that user base all the way through graduation. The company's recently come out with a new product called Prezi Video. Have you seen that? I think it's putting Prezi back on the map, quite honestly, and I hope so because I still have a lot of shares in the company. So it allows you to embed yourself into the presentation. So I'll say that this was, like, I could create a video of myself and I could have a pie chart here and I could sort of point to the chart. So I'm a virtual participant in the presentation. And I think that that product is going to get Prezi into the business space in a big way. Yeah, that'd be my answer.
Just to follow up on
Yep.
that. So as you said, like, Prezi is trying to create a cohort of students who would carry that on.
Yeah.
I mean, I know about student ambassadorships which are offered in the universities. I was a part of one of them. But the only hiccup which I faced was that the product was not used in the industry. So, although we love the product,
Yeah.
but it's difficult to keep it going.
So the product was used in business for the primary reason that Prezi was used for high stakes presentation. So CEOs would use it for the one time they were doing TED or, but then in the daily presentations, it was too hard for them to use. And when a CEO used it, they would hire a Prezi designer, like I hired a Prezi designer. Well, actually, I co-opted a former employee to build my Prezi. But that's to get into the business in a big way, that's not going to work. So I'm not sure how its base level presentation is going to compete in business. So I totally understand. Wait, were you one of the Prezi ambassadors? Because I started that program.
Yeah, I am.
You were?
Back in India, I
Oh, wow. What year?
2018.
2018. Oh, I wasn't there. But I started that program. I loved that program. Our ambassadors were amazing.
So it was more like to spread awareness
Yep.
about Prezi in
Yep.
campus. So it was more like that.
Which is what we hired. I mean, we didn't expect the ambassadors to be able to take it into business. That's a business problem, not an ambassador problem. But what I loved what the ambassadors did on their campuses. I thought it was like so energizing to me. And the creative, I mean, they would do their face paint like a Prezi logo. I'm like, wow, it's so cool. But I do think Prezi Video is going to put Prezi, because Prezi's sort of gone. I mean, I asked people about Prezi today, and they're like, oh, I remember when Prezi was a thing. Well, I hope it becomes a new thing with Prezi Video.
Thank you.
Well, there's two. Can I take two? Pause. One, okay.
One, and then I'll give you an option.
Okay. I'll answer it fast and get to yours.
You have moved around a lot throughout your life.
Yes.
So I was wondering, how did you figure it out when you wanted to move out from a company to company? Is it more like your inner voice, or is it how you observe?
No, it was more opportunistic. I mean, to New York was because I wanted to dance in New York. And my girlfriend at the time was saying, you got to move to New York, got to move to New York. Boston was because MIT was there. San Francisco was because of Silicon Valley. I really wanted to work in Silicon Valley. And I fell in love with San Francisco at the moment I arrived. And then Budapest because I was working for Hungarian entrepreneurs. And so it just made sense to move over there for a little while. So that is, getting away from Memphis was my one serious choice. I was like, I'm leaving this city. That one was a choice all mine. Can I get one more? One? No?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
You spoke about having real drive in both engineering and artistically, and how after college you kind of started doing those two things separately,
Yep.
and then you kind of tried, you found people who saw them as being together.
Yep.
So my question is, would you recommend out of college trying to pursue both things independently, and afterwards, did you find that in your work you were fulfilled in a creative way, or is that something you had to do outside of work?
I think now there are so many tech companies that do design-oriented, that use design in a very strategic way. It's a whole different world now. So I think now I would go into one of those companies and be able to work with my passion was dance at the time. I don't know any companies where you can incorporate dance, so that would be hard. So I'd probably keep that one outside. But if you're any other parts of design, it's really integrated. Like if you go to Apple, wow, it's hard to understand what's tech and what's design. Same with Airbnb. It started as designers. I don't know if you know the history, but they were designers and then built the technology, or they wanted to differentiate their service through design, which they did. So I don't think I would force them separately. There just wasn't that option back then.
All right. Thank you very much, Drew.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Thank you. So before everyone leaves, Drew, I have a little token of our appreciation for you.
Oh my gosh, thanks.
And I'm sure that there are other people that have questions. So if you have a burning question you weren't able to ask, will you be able to stick around for a few minutes? Okay.
Sure.
So he'll graciously stick around for a few minutes. I just want to say, if you need to have a form signed, I'll be here for a few minutes afterwards. And I invite you to come back in January when we will kick off with 3 more great speakers. Thank you again. Thank you to LabCorp for sponsoring this, and we'll see you next spring.